what is it that we want to kind of basically reference later on.
Yeah, I think that'll determine what our answer to number 1 is.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. So everybody's here. It's just been a kind of a loose flippity flappity so far. Morgan, your email.
Yep. Morgan.Hough.
Okay. Huff like tough.
Yeah. Or rough.
There you are. Okay.
That's my political slogan.
All right, cool.
Think rough, think tough, think Huff.
So that's everybody should have a link to this now. I put it in the chat. I'll still put the Notion in the chat for today's. The main feature will be going through this, and a lot of this is very, very draft state, and a lot of points to prompt us to think about, a lot of questions to think about, a few comments, a lot of structure work I'm really curious about doing, but that's sort of where we're at. But you know, we have things rolling and cooking, so that's cool. But before we get there, we can start with our hellos. So hi, how's everyone doing today?
Cold.
Cold is a fair answer. I think everybody, except probably Morgan, is actually today. Yeah. Maybe Morgan is too. We all deserve, blankets or whatnot. Any other updates? I'll have a few, but anybody else want to say anything before? On other stuff. Okay. My general update is just I've been working on this. I've been looking. I think this is the original paper, the Martini critique. It's not actually showing me the paper, but the abstract. I was looking at this guy and his thing on writing paper. I don't think there's really a lot for us to take. Like, there's a lot here, but I don't have anything profound to really. Oh yeah, from that's going to apply to this specifically. So
I think that'll be helpful once we have like next to final draft. We're like,
yeah,
what else does this need? And then we'll look here.
And I do like how Levin kind of points out about structuring the narrative and making a structure first, and how this is a nice paragraph. Just to blow this up, I can't blow it up. Separating the structure versus the narrative and versus how you want to do things, I guess. And how it's a nice way to break things out, or like, breadth first, and then, main ideas, ordering them and going to the next level, and kind of sectioning off that way, which is basically, I think, where we're at in this too. I have some twinkly dink mind maps if we want to use them. I'm not beholden. This is very up in the air for that. And I didn't see this. This might come up later when we talk about figures we might want to put in the paper. This is an interesting paper by Morgan, put this in the chat earlier. But I don't know. My update is that I'm heavily deburdened from some stuff, and it's great. Like, I feel kind of a bit like, oh, I'm in a new year, and I have things to do and ways to do stuff. So I'm feeling light. I wish I kind of got to do a little bit more of this paper, but at the same time, I realized I'm about as far as I could get, because there's so many questions I want to ask. I think, personally speaking, if I just kind of structured half a paper and said, "Hey guys, you want to fill in parts about this and this," I feel a lot more comfortable. I think we're going to need a meeting or two, maybe even three. We'll see, of like dialoguing about the structure specifically of the paper, because of a lot of things we talked about. So I'm content with that, but I'm feeling deburdened, and just, I don't know if it's a word, but that's cool. Yeah, that's basically my thing. There hasn't there hasn't really been any like major discussions so far. I managed to a bit earlier. I just quoted some things, and we can just basically jump into that. Was there anything else people want to say before we do that? We have a decent amount of time, um, so I think we're good. So yeah, let's go into it. If you want to take notes on it, um, I'm mostly keeping. This is more for the meeting. I guess I put it here. I for like notes on the process of writing it that you may not want to put in the paper. I'll put this in the slide too. This is like the actual position paper stub. So if you want to like write free notes about what we're talking about, I might suggest that you put them here. But if anybody can write like you know, you can write comment away. Comments are helpful and great on the Google Doc. Yeah. Um, so there are a couple questions here that I'll probably come back to and that I want to put in as we go. But the main deal for today will pretty much be this. And to do a quick walkthrough of this, um, there's basically the outline. Um, I don't I don't really have a cool title right now. This will probably change. I have some ideas, some funny ideas. One was like, "What happened to cognitive science?" Really, based off of the Nunez paper, "What happened to cognitive science," which we will not be using, but it's fun. We got an abstract introduction, background. One of those questions we're going to sort out is sort of, when we talk about background, how do we want to split talking about these bigger concepts in cognitive science and history or whatever, which is a big old can of worms, versus the history of what we have done in the group. We've kind of gone through this specific path. We have some questions here that we'll get into, but sort of bridging a big overview of the field versus we pick some key themes that we particularly scope and care about, because one of the discussion points we had earlier was there's some pretty not interesting ways to talk about 4E cognition that won't really lend us to having like good discussions. And there's more interesting ways to talk about them and more interesting ways to frame them. So how do we want to choose the 4Es or this sort of cognitive science established paradigms in a way that's accurate and like reasonable, but also will lend us to being more rich in the discussion. Um, so that's one thing to think about. How much depth do we want to have in interviewing our specific path? Like each of these could be a subsection with a paragraph, or they could all be crammed into one big paragraph where we go into all these different things that we have done in the group. That's sort of on the table. The next section, argument development, counter arguments and rebuttals. These are basically ChatGTP augmented ideas. They're not concrete, but just some things that we wanted to mention. Phenomenological stuff, MIC, developmental considerations. I should put in. I don't know. I'll write it here. That paper will come up somewhere because that's what we talked about in the 2021 discussion group. But yeah, just sort of the arguments we want to make. We've got development, we've got MIC, we've got maybe neurodivergent stuff, we've got reductionism, we've got Fuchs is kind of a subpoint to that, perhaps in different ways. We've got to address, thinking, well, what's the argument's going to say, counter arguments, and so on. And then kind of another place for a lot of feedback will be how we want to talk about the research that we want to do. We have sort of these things that we've talked about. We have three sub projects: descriptive, prescriptive, evaluatorial. We have these lenses, which is informed constraint, the push for formalization. We have these potential deliverables of the glossaries, the methods database, interviews, things like that, things we may want to put out. How do we want to talk about them? Do we want to seem committed to them? Do we want to say, oh, we have done X, Y, Z? Those are some things to talk about. And conclusion, some references and appendices and things like that. There's a few other notes here, including some notes that Amanda took, I think, from Fuchs's preface, and appreciate that being here. I tried to fish some things out of our Notion space. But yeah, that's kind of a very draft state, and I'm very intentionally not finalizing some of the structure, the order of things, and even like the titles for this are to be changed. But just as kind of a starting point, I wanted to throw that out there, and now we can build off of it. So I think Morgan and Bradley are kind of seeing this for the first time. Amanda's had his name saw a few minutes before you all, so I'm open to kind of broad comments, or if you want to start at any different point and be more specific, you can be open to do so.
Well, I mean, is this going to be like, I don't want to be kind of flippant, but is there going to be a point to this paper? Like, it just seems like we're making a laundry list of things that, like maybe common critiques or critiques that we have, or, I mean, sometimes you have to focus it down on a couple of case studies, or sometimes, like a demonstration, like a tutorial type thing. It's not that you can't do what you've kind of outlined, but the thing is that's kind of been done before, maybe, in other papers. So it might be worth looking and seeing where we find these critiques over and over, and kind of putting those together, or even a meta-analysis of different things in these areas. So like, where we say there's a methodology, or a roast of candidate methodologies, we should like point out what those are in the literature, at least, kind of list like kind of a meta-analysis where you have like, here's some papers from this area, here's some papers from this area, and maybe give it a little bit of a treatment. Say what are their shortcomings and their advantages and things they're identifying, and then what are the things that we're identifying? Is it similar? Do we have something novel? Those sorts of things. So I mean, I guess you can't really tell that from the outline, but I just want to make sure that it isn't like kind of a laundry list of things, and then because that has limited usefulness.
The
Yeah.
more I think about it, and this goes off what Bradley just said, the more I think about it, I like the idea of framing this as defining the E's the way we think they should be defined, because that would both help focus what types of cogsi we want to give background on. But that's still a very, broad category. So there are other people who have written on like what the E's are supposed to be. But that's a body of literature that I feel like we could tackle and respond well to. And that would allow us to make, if you go to the list under, if you scroll up and go to our arguments, I think that all of those could be framed as having a particular like definition of the E's. So I think that that's a compelling way to me to frame the paper,
Well,
especially in light of what Bradley just said.
yeah, and I think one of the things we want to do is like, is this going to be a position paper about the project, or do we want it to be, and that one of the things I think, as I was kind of in this point over here that I was having a discussion moments before this all started, was like there's so much to to choose from for potentially structuring this, and it's like which one do we want to be? Because if we want to have something that's not a like there's a document to be made that's literally just talking about the project itself that we want to do. Is that may not be a published paper that we want to make in the context of a paper, and you know versus like all these different meta-analysis versus okay we've picked a theme of let's redefining our take on 4E, whatever. Like where we go, the theme is like, okay, let's use that as the major lens for the paper and define off of that versus what we've been doing and what we read. And so it's a bit. Those are different things, and maybe what we sort out with first is basically what we can even return to the infamous pyramid.
It's
but,
famous. It doesn't have to be infamous.
It could be maybe we were making some different maybe something should be spun off into other specific groupings. So I guess I'll return to that and say, is this a position paper that we want to be making? And if so, what should that position paper contain? Maybe is a fair way to start it. Is it, I think our current thing to supplant or addresses, is this going to be a position paper on what we feel about 4Es and cognitive science and where we should go based off of what we've read? Or otherwise?
I mean, there are a lot of opinions everyone has, and it's not necessarily useful to put yet another opinion out there. But, it's like with 4Es, it's like there's so much you could cover. And it's not very clear because I couldn't tell you. I know what the 4Es are, but like everyone has an opinion about what they are. And, you could, we should probably have like a short working definition, but like, maybe one of the reasons why cognitive science is such a mess is because there's so many opinions and definitions floating around out there that it's like, whose do you pick out of the ether? And it's like, okay. You know what I'm getting at? Like, it's hard to have a unified field when you have all these things floating around. But yeah, I guess, the thing is, I don't know if people would publish something that was just kind of like, going through and saying what our position is. I mean, they have like position papers, but these usually tend to be very fixated on a specific topic. And they're usually pretty provocative, but I don't really like that because people do it on purpose, kind of instigating something. But yeah, I mean, I think if we worked out some like detail in terms of like what we were looking, what we say, what people should do, but also kind of give it some sort of, meat, say to the, flesh to the bone, so to speak. So, when I say like a meta-analysis, I just simply mean like framing like maybe the 4Es in terms of what are the major papers, what are the major arguments, which ones kind of align with what we're viewing, what we're thinking, but maybe which ones are also the strongest in terms of how we might define cognitive science, because it's always a matter of drawing that circle around the different areas. Some people would include robots, some people wouldn't. Some people would include AI. I think everyone will include AI at this point, but historically not. So I mean, there's a lot of things, but we should have like, clear definitions, but we should also frame this around some really, specific things. And not make it just our opinion though, put it in the context of like the field. Because I don't think people would listen to us if we just said this is how cognitive science should be. Because we're not really, if Andy Clark wrote a paper like that, everyone would listen, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So right. So I'm getting a pretty clear sense that if we are going to write a paper about the project, or it should be basically a different kind of a document, and not like meta-analysis to me feels very different than
Well, no, we wouldn't set it up like that. I mean, we could use this basically following this. It's just like each one of these points, methodology is a big block. It would break out eventually from this, or maybe not this line, but like there'd be a part here, maybe like evaluatory lenses. And we would have like in there, we would have like kind of say what it, what from the, maybe, I mean, more of a systematic literature review. But I mean, we could do it in different ways. I don't really care. But like just to really ground it in what's going on in the field, or what's going on in, how can we fit it into what people care about.
mm,
So I don't think you need to restructure everything. I think it's just a matter of like really grounding some of these points in things.
okay. I see Amanda writing some stuff over here. Do you want to comment on that? I can see some of what you put.
Yeah, I'm thinking one thing that might be helpful is if we think about, because like we could, a reader could keep asking why, like why should I think this? Why should I think this? So maybe one thing that would be helpful is to think about like our ground floor, like what are the things we are on board with that we don't need feel like we want to argue for in this paper that we should just like take as a given, and maybe the most big picture version of that, is that what we're trying to do is figure out the best way to study the mind, um,
Mm,
and so when we're like that's what we're trying to do, and we're not going to defend why we're trying to do that. um, and that's also that's like a motivating thing that would make the project, um, it would just like get people on board quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think getting people on board is always the key. Like, you know, they don't want to have to search around for why should I care to read this. Um, and that, it tends to happen with papers like this because it's like you're telling people how to do something better, and like you don't, it's not better.
so, hmm, okay, let's let's start here, perhaps, or I guess it could be here. Um, so what? Okay, just avoiding taking away whatever is on the other sheet. Um, what do we want? What do we want the paper to be? What? Because I I think we're um, I think that's the question. Like, what do we want? What do we want to say with this paper? I I'm hearing let's ground this in we want to be relevant. We want to be relevant in a and be useful. Okay. Um, is that something that the what's I think shifting for me is the sense that this whatever this paper was going to be, is not necessarily grounded on the stuff that we've read, and now is going to be a conceptual like in terms of the pyramid, it's kind of in the space of something kind of in the middle, or is it really going to be like a big literature review of discussion on other papers that are outside of everything we've read so far in the field? Like, is the paper's main references going to be stuff we've read so far, or other things? I guess.
It would be both. And the reason you do that is because you can't think of it like a high school book report where you're just regurgitating stuff that you read. I mean, that's not that, it's not interesting. It's just like when people read this, they'll say, okay, this is a new way to view cognitive science. So we read this book and this is what we think. And people are like, so how does that relate to my work? Because if people have already read the book, they'll say, oh yeah, okay, that's great, Or if they've not read the book, they'll say, oh, it may be interesting, but I don't see how it relates to my work. That's the sort of thing that's going to happen when people read it. You can say, okay, well, I just mean that, if we want to get it published or we want to have it be widely read, people will say, okay, we just need to take what we've read, which is, I guess, a position, and then you want to ground that in other literature. So you want to bring in some other literature and say, this is kind of where it fits. If you want to build a map of cognitive science, it can't just be the things that you want to cherry pick and build a path. You have to kind of say, okay, what else is going on in the field? And it doesn't need to be a full blown like history or, you don't want to like make it unrestrained either, which is like, some people have the tendency
Right,
to want to do everything.
of course, we don't want to do a full blown history of stuff.
Yeah.
That's not what we're doing.
But what does it sort of relate to? Maybe what is it better than or worse than? These sorts of things where we have a candidate approach. We're saying this is a candidate. We're saying this is a strong candidate, but we can't just say we read these books and we think it's a strong candidate because we read these books. It's a strong candidate because it fits into the field in a way that's advantageous, and we know kind of because we read the books, we know why, or we have an opinion as to why.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not particularly sure what to go on to next then. Um, I mean, it sounds like we have a lot more to sort out uh, than um, yeah.
Well, I think we just need to, keep working on it. I mean, it's not going to get done like in 5 weeks. This is something we got to, we'll have to do a literature review and we'll have to do some good, I think maybe a good a good next step is to go through this and say, okay, we've got this sort of path that we're advocating for. It's not obvious to a lot of people, but what at each point in that path, what is the literature we need to review on? So like for DISI, which is the diverse intelligences, what's the literature in diverse intelligences? You don't need to like review everything, but just what are maybe some of the contrasting approaches to that? Like, you know what I mean? Like you take each point and you say, what are the pieces of literature here that are relevant? Maybe no one's really addressed the problem too much, which is fine. It's just that, the reader needs to know that. So we have this path through like agents and diverse intelligence and, development and reductionism and all this. And it forms some sort of path. We need to know kind of what that path is. Like, and then like we can review the different relevant parts. I mean, you could argue about reductionism versus emergentism maybe for a long time, but that's not really the only thing you want to cover. So you don't want to review that area and then don't, not really think about the other areas. It's a foundational thing, right? But it's not something, you want to just kind of get that out of the way. You want to figure, okay, what have people said about it? What's our approach? What's our advantage? and then move on to something else. So it doesn't need to be like a huge amount of work, but it does need to be like each point really needs to be defended well. And, sometimes you're going to need to do some things that are pretty formalized to get there. And, I don't know. It's just, I think the next step would just to be kind of flesh out these points. Like just pick a point and start working on like, maybe like outlining the point and saying, we have some key papers as to how this is done in the field, maybe a contrasting view, and then what's our position and how does that compare? And that's the point. And then you move on to the next point. And then once we get to that, once we get those fleshed out, then we can say, okay, this is how it fits together. And that's going to be a lot of work, but it's not. Papers usually are a lot of work.
Okay, well maybe that will decide some of what we cover next in the reading group. Let's see. I know we've talked a bit about these lenses, but one of the things that I guess let's yeah, I mean what are the points then? I mean, let's if we're gonna be managing the scoping and the structure, then okay, let's make explicit what the points are that we want there to be these sort of centers around. We've discussed them, but maybe the next step is to be very okay. What are the future subheadings of the paper or of that section, whether they get a heading or not? Like
Well,
what?
arguments in your outline, I think, are pretty good. The I forgot the title. Arguments.
Section?
Yes,
Okay.
and that's where I think each of those could be framed. Maybe some more easily than others, but framed as a refinement of one of the E's. So that's where we could make contact with that literature on what the E's mean. We could make contact with the literature that's particular to each of these things. So phenomenology, development, neurodivergence, and reductionism. So I think, yeah, those four things are good starting points. And there's kind of two, maybe each has kind of like two aspects. One, like I guess what I just said, like explaining how it could be a refinement of one of the four E's, and then also just like what does the research in this field look like, and that's where we kind of have to cross the bridges as we come to them with what's most interesting and relevant.
In this grouping, I think the neurodivergence and whatever spectrum thing, that's sort of something we haven't really done anything in this space. I'm not sure we want to. And as far as what to do in this group, and I guess potentially this paper is, I'm not beholden to having this here, but I feel like, okay, we've done a lot specifically. We've kind of spent a lot of time in the last year in this particular space, and fleshing that out with its sort of contrasting points, like that. I can see that making sense as a, you know, ooh, I kind of see the shape of this, And I guess going forward, do we want there to be I don't know, like, and this gets into the from a top level standpoint, like in terms of trying to flesh out things in a paper pyramid sense, like do there's questions about like what do we want to focus on next and what do we want to do? Like is this um we're coming off a lot of time in this space, right? We have uh, kind of a lot of all of like the pro, why we want to incorporate this stuff. Do we want to look at critique papers next, or do we want to try to really have this be our kind of guiding light of like, okay, the current like agenda for the project as it stands um, is finishing our take on getting all the like meta-analysis type stuff for pros and cons in this space before going on to any of these other topics, um, or you know how much do we want to try to contain what we do in this group ahead towards essentially building out whatever this paper is. I think this, you know,
I think what would be nice for each of those headings, the 4 headings, is that we kind of do what sometimes I do on Saturdays, which is to get a bunch of papers and just kind of do like a presentation, maybe in the meeting here, on what let's summarize what we know about this area. So we've talked about some of these areas for a while. Let's summarize some of them. Let's go through some other papers, and let's think about like what is our position, and how does it square away with the rest of the field. So you kind of bring some papers and you talk about it, and you think you could prepare some PowerPoint slides if you want. But it would help, I think, clarify the points as to what is it about. We haven't really done a meta kind of discussion about that. We've just kind of like we've been reading Fuchs and then talking informally about some of these points, and then maybe like some of the things going on in the larger scope of studying the brain, studying the mind, but not really put it together in terms of a point by point argument, what's in the literature, what's needed in the literature, which is always what people look for in papers. So I think that would be helpful if we had that kind of a thing where we just went through maybe 30 minutes and said, this is where we are with this. And just kind of recapping, but in a very focused way. And that would help with that because we could just write basically from there, that section.
Yeah, it's almost basically like this what we're currently talking about this paper should be is more in this space, maybe even higher. But there's a lot of things to do in these spaces that are pretty. They don't have to become papers, but it's almost like we should have something here. We should have something here. We should have something here. Much more so than what this paper started becoming a major. I don't know. Quite a broader thing that's not exactly tenable where we are right now, which is fine.
Well, if we did present on these things, we'd have things that we'd kick out for like a specialized paper. We'd have a very broad overview for this paper, and then we'd have, it just helps you think about all the things that are there. And then you kind of, you always do that when you write a paper, you kick stuff out, or you maybe move it to something else and you say, oh, I'll write a paper on this one topic. Because you could write a paper, I'm sure you could write a paper on all those topics, or 10 papers on all those topics. But that's not really what you want to do. But I think getting a handle on the field or on the topic and where it fits in the field is always good. And it can lead to the other papers too. It can give you like that deep dive or that overview or whatever.
Yeah. Excuse me. Okay. So it sounds like basically the next step is finishing up what this is. Eh, and I don't know, like, um, we've read a lot of essentially, I don't know, things that are favoring this stuff, and I don't know if the next step in this space, I guess, questionable. Um, uh, Something like that. Like, do we want to spend some time basically looking at some of the critique papers or other? What would balance out our stuff here to sort of round out literature review type stuff? Um, Maybe those are the next papers that we'll look at and try to discuss in the group. What other ways can we move that part forward?
I think looking for criticisms would be useful, and we've kind of tried to do that, but we haven't found much that seems to be criticizing um, the things that we're most interested in. Like they've kind of been duds. um, but I think we should keep looking for criticisms of. Well, I guess so. Step one is I think we could pick out the parts of on becoming aware and the papers that are related to that. This was a while ago, but maybe the parts of Evan Thompson's book, the things we read that fall into this category. I think we should pick out the things that we find most compelling and that we like, that we're on board with, that we'd want to defend, and then maybe look for criticisms of those particular views. But what I don't think we need to do is outline our position and then try to offer our own completely novel from scratch argument in favor of it. Because that, like, we've read this other material, so I think it would be helpful to find the best arguments in that material and collect them, and then we should offer also our original argument, but not from scratch, and then we could maybe find papers that are critical of the things we want to defend specifically.
Okay.
So just kind of reviewing what we've read, and I mean, I started to do this with Fuchs, like picking out the highlights. Yeah, I didn't get very far, but I think that I can keep doing that with Fuchs.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Anything else to kind of add to what we want to do in the phenomenology and understanding form constraint space?
Well, I guess what I just said also applies to the other topics. Just finding what other people have said that we really like and using that as
Yeah. I think what I'm seeing like ahead, and this discussion is basically turned a little bit more into project direction itself, which is fine. And that's something that I really wanted to talk about anyway. And whoops, I think I just got myself a little messed up. Here we go. Because like I don't think we've done, at least in the reading group, like there's definitely more like I guess Fuchs is kind of a polemic person directly saying, I'm going to take on reductionism in every part of my book. I'm going to tell you why reductionism is bad at this. Okay. But I think like I think there's a lot more in these specific spaces. That's kind of why I wanted to, identify, at least right now, what are these big umbrellas. Okay, we have one, we have development, we have reductionism. Okay. And maybe that's fine for now, but like I think there's definitely a more we could discuss, even if it's and I'm just to say this, I'm sympathetic to the fact that we have all these outside of the reading group, then we don't need to just reread them here to talk about them necessarily. So maybe some of these things are things we kind of do in a more uh, Saturday morning Neurosim Bradley paper discussion, high level overview sense. If we've spent time there, we don't necessarily need to do the deep dive on some aspects of these things, but at least kind of grouping them out and saying, okay, this chunk, this chunk, this chunk. Like for the next few weeks, we focus on rounding out this part of things. Maybe is sort of what we're functionally doing in the meetings. So yeah. Any other any like it is a little bit out of turn, but any other outside of MIC and phenomenology, outside of this very broad remark about developmental aspects, can be considerations or whatever, and reductionism, which are three, you know, I'm agnostic right now about some of the framing of them, but like this feels like an actual tangible chunk of things that, in the context of, you know, forward, which maybe is 4E's, forward, whatever. Like what positions do we want to take, I guess? Which was kind of was coming down to the lenses stuff before. You know, is there anything else you want to add to this list currently? Or not even bother adding right now because there's enough here to just churn out for a while.
Oh, I think there's enough here for now. I think once we get to that point, once we work some of these out, we might get a fifth point that emerges out of that, like a sub point. I mean, it's hard to know now, but I think if we, maybe like I could work a lot on the developmental stuff, kind of flesh out some ideas there, because and if you want to do some as well, but there are things we've talked about a number of papers,
Yeah.
and it's that hard part of like getting it down to synthesis, right? Like, what is the most important stuff here? Not everything we really might think is relevant to cog sci, and some of the papers that maybe not isn't relevant to cog sci, because we've talked about papers from like different areas of behavioral science and philosophy and that, so it's like they have different aims, so their arguments are going kind of in a different direction. But we have like things that we kind of want to have we kind of want to base it on what those papers are talking about. Like there's a broad overview of why it's useful to think developmentally, and so neurodiversity might be a subtopic of development. I would say probably neurodiversity would be like, if you're thinking about development in the context of like, individual variation, basically, where you have development, but then you have these, this variation that we also want to capture. It's not development, but it's, this, I don't know how we would describe it. It's something that we don't think about in mainstream cognitive science all the time. Like, we don't really think about development. We don't really think about individual variation. So
Yeah, and that's, I mean, we're kind of going back to this previous set of notes here. I think I'd really like to articulate some of this stuff, and like this is a space that I don't know particularly in like, I don't know, cognitive science, psychology, whatnot, like the some of the nuances, like how to really to talk about that. We talked about like divergences in here and variations, and I think that's a thing. Like, what is marginal versus what is mainstream? What is sort of the monolithic stuff? And how can I put this here? So that's not going to make, it's more of a specific comment for myself, but like neurodivergence and the sort of vast differences of how people process stuff, I do think is sort of maybe I don't really know yet if I feel I can say it's a subtopic or not. It can be. I think development in and of itself and sort of what is the thing doing over the course of its lifetime, like a little bit of ontogeny versus other things in like phenotype stuff. But
But I can certainly adds to the neuroimaging case for here's a task and here are two different kind of activation patterns associated with the execution of the task. You know, like there's one way to process group data where you basically average across subjects, and another is to cluster and kind of find groups within uh, you know how close are the activation patterns between subjects, and you can basically separate on the basis of their activation, um, for instance,
okay, yeah,
but I guess the interesting or the well, I guess there is a question of does that actually mean that they're doing the task differently, or does that mean that they just their brain is wired differently?
That's where the first person data gathering would be useful.
Mm. Mm.
yeah. Like there's a lot when we get here. I mean, I'm not interested in saying, oh, I want to spend April through May through June on this specifically. Maybe we do get maybe that's useful for people or not, but I feel like there's a lot here. And I mean, the other point I kind of made this comment, like reduction is sort of this, like big bad that could kind of fit anywhere here. And I mean, I think one of the more interesting things here will be like related to Fuchs, but like, what do we do? I don't know if we can actually come up with a useful thing in general about that, but also like in our project. Like if that would be a huge win if we have some actual useful idea about that. I don't know if it's really a tenable one. But I feel like I see what I feel pretty decent in this space about breaking down into like crystallized functionable points that are going to be relevant to other people and to ourselves. I've been in the space a while now, and all of us, thank you for being part of the journey. Like I get what those are. There's a lot here, both like neurodivergence itself and development are like very, very strong. There will be a lot of things there that specific points can be made about. Reductionism is feels different to me in that it's not quite shaking your fist in the wind, but more like it could be at anywhere at any time. And I don't. Like there's a very philosophical, stance you could take, and also like a more implementation wise, is this I guess what I'm saying is I could see this. I could really just see it being one and it'd be 2A, 2B, or even 2, 3, however you want to split it up. And then this being sort of a backdrop philosophical argument that we address philosophically, but also implementation wise. Because I feel like implementation for this, basically what Morgan just said, and otherwise, and given what I don't know, the first person data stuff I could see that being an approach that we take about it, but otherwise, I don't know. This one feels a little different than the other two to me, if that makes sense.
I don't really like the idea of like framing it as like this reductionism versus whatever argument. I mean, I mean, I think that's going to be needlessly inflammatory.
Right.
But I mean, like, what are maybe a better way to put it is what are the limitations of a reductionist data set? What are the limitations of some other type of data set? Is it, are they maybe complementary, or, where are they complementary, where are they not? So if someone wanted to do this, they're going to have probably, data sets that are, I guess, you call them reductionists. I don't know what that would involve, but like, they often have that sort of model or have those kind of data available to them. And in fact, doing, neuroimaging, you'd have to kind of, or, some other area, you'd have to kind of rely on those sorts of structures to collect data. So, how do you put, maybe, is there a way to be complementary to the data sets that exist now? Are there, are there ways that aren't, just to identify those things and make sure
Yeah.
that we know where, you can go as a person doing this?
And I think I'm drawn to like philosophy. Obviously, philosophy matters. Hashtag philosophy matters. But like, I think making reductionism tied to data collection, data management, data, I don't know, conceptualization would be potentially interesting. Um, we'll see. I think it'll be something we come up against, but I don't envision myself in any of the I think more tenable lower pyramidal papers that we're kind of at working on, or will sort of be next ish, or the bigger position paper ahead, maybe even the tip of the pyramid, or underneath it somewhat. Um, I don't want to do a Fuchs and the ecology of the brain. Um, I don't want to start every chapter with here's why reduction is bad. Um, but I think having some well-reasoned arguments for philosophy and implementation might be good. Okay, so, oops.
I have to go, but I feel good about being able to contribute between now and next week.
Yeah, I was gonna say like I, I don't know if there's a lot more to discuss about this right now. I think we want to focus on these and maybe we just look at papers in this space. So if you want to add things in the Slack or whatever, you can do that. Thank you, Amanda, for everything. Appreciate your comments. And, until next time.
Yeah, no problem. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, talk to you soon. Take care.
But yeah, I mean, I didn't have a whole lot more to stretch out, but I'm open for discussions on anything. But I think kind of isolating this, which is really continuing on the path that we've been on, but I think isolating this is sort of what we want to get from this space, and kind of will be a nice continuing on the target for where to go next with this group.
So under 2A, you put parenti article, and it's actually a renti, and
Whoops.
you conflated your name with the author.
Yeah, I know. I'm so
Here, I wish I'd written.
so much that way. Yeah, I think that's a good article to start from. I mean, her basic conclusion was like, "Oh, this is why developmental robotics matter." But I think I'd be curious to see kind of what is, find out what side of that paper or what's come after it. It wasn't. It's a few years. It's older now, even. So
A couple of years. Yeah. What was the other paper that we had pointed out? There was a review article. I can't remember. It was probably like published last year or something. I can't remember. but that's another one to go to.
So was it like specifically about? Was it domain or
It was
discipline?
about it was about development in just behavioral science, not in psychology necessarily, but
Okay, I'm remembering a little bit of it.
yeah, but I can't remember the first author. But yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, drawing from like papers like that. Yeah.
I'm 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 real curious. Like it would be it would be interesting because thinking about what I want to do and whoops, what I don't want to do. Thinking about what I want to do in this space. Um, that'll be interesting and challenging. On the other hand, I guess I should say uh, it's been really nice to look into this space, and it's kind of why I'm glad this is happening because seeing the history of a lot more of the historical dynamics of the DSM itself, and hopefully getting into the ICD, will be very interesting grounding for some of this stuff. Um, and even you know, um, there's a lot here that I'm not really sure. Like, there's a lot here I would like to sort of present and talk about in the future, maybe even on Saturday specifically. Uh, oh, I might have another topic here, uh, which is basically this lens. But I feel like formalization is a pretty
Right.
decent like. I'd almost I could see, you know, like uh, MIC, sure, development, um, basically something like this, and then I don't know, like I have a lot of contention about what to do with reductionism, but it doesn't really matter right now. It's
Yeah.
just, I'm not gonna. But I feel like formalization could at least be a very big banner of like what can be done there.
Right. Yeah, because cognitive science has like this focus on like how connectionism is formalization, or sometimes different types of models or formalization, mathematics. And we talked about, like, of course, the Logicel and things like
Yeah,
that.
that's what I was gonna write again.
Yeah, let me see if it does it again. It gave me a thumbs up in the window. I missed it. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, basically, I think that's a good point because you want to be able to have a formal set of models as well, and maybe reconsider what we have, because especially with AI and sort of how that's like modern AI with respect to deep learning and reinforcement learning, and those hadn't necessarily found their way into the classic cog-sci literature. So the classic cog-sci literature, especially
Yeah.
like 30 years ago, people were talking about connectionism and all this, and then that kind of died down a little bit. And now you have these new models. So what were you going to say, Jesse?
Not important. It just reminds me I mentioned a while ago, or maybe last Saturday or something. But why it would be a very comparing and contrasting the development of machine learning and cognitive science in a way that it would be not good. It's not a great example or a great contrast, but I think there's a way to take it as a I think there's something useful there. I just don't know what the best way to do it is, and I think it ties in a little bit what you're saying about how like machine learning is taken off in a very specific, there's a boom for it, and even whatever, but it's sort of like it, some link coupling or referencing that relative to why cognitive science isn't and hasn't, and I think that would tie nicely into some of the, we talked about the quote last time from the data science thing about how the medium presents this sort of, the medium itself computationally generates this data. It makes certain choice presence in it. And that would feed nicely into mutually informed constraint, I think would link towards, okay, being able to get a little bit more of some kind of, maybe not computation, but something that generates data because you have this aspect to it. But yes, to return to what you were saying, I think there is something at the level of formalization, the level of what I think it's A. Kavya was trying to do
Yeah.
in his books. Like, okay, here's ways we could push some of this theory forward, and at the level of like computationally, which is I think super relevant to everything from computational psychiatry on out to what we were talking about. I think that will be a key arena to explore.
Yeah. Also, we have large language models and some of the things around that where people, I know this is not like in the mainstream of cognitive science, but people are having these debates of whether they're sentient or whether they're self-aware or whether they exhibit sort of cognitive-like qualities, and then of course people who say absolutely not, and consciousness or whatever, But the point is that could benefit. I mean, that hasn't been fully absorbed into cog sci, where people are actually asking that question in a rigorous manner. So there's not necessarily a methodology for that.
But I mean, I think it would be good, or certainly under the developmental dimension to this, that machine learning, is certainly like its success is still relatively recent.
Yeah.
and has super focused on performing well on particular benchmarks, right?
Yeah.
And maximizing on particular benchmarks, which again kind of like it isn't developmental in any way. So one kind of like talking about continual AI, or things that are under the heading of continual learning, but certainly under the this doesn't capture the complexity of the first 2 years of a baby's life, in the sense of like how many tasks they're mastering, and how they're kind of all they're doing multiple things at the same time. And just thinking about Linda Smith's development weaves brains, bodies, and environments into cognition, right? And and then linking that into well, I can think of some additional kind of machine learning examples to just to get across, with toy problems, getting across computational models of cognitive development, where you are training something and you start with random weights. You're training something and you start with with weights that have some either distributional arrangement, or that they were trained on something else, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like again, like just trying to kind of come up with like Thalen and Smith's original book on you know, what was the title? But it was basically cognitive development in robots and
Right.
children.
Yeah.
Right. And you know, using robots in a Bratenberg kind of way to get across, you know, to get across some of these ideas in a easily digestible fashion for how, you know, the body, the particular network, you know, the kind of the connectomics, which is obviously changing over time dramatically, in even like the first, you know, 12 years of life, um, and again, like I haven't thought about this or even like really read much about this, but in terms of how you search your environment, how that is changing over those years, right?
Yeah.
And you know, which again is kind of you know, I'm gonna say Phelan and Smith all the time, even though it's, you know, Linda Smith again.
Well, that was the GoPro work, right? The point of it was to show the visual search strategy.
You know, like that is changing too. You know, I mean, it's one thing when I talk about like, hey, we're doing this cognitive task and we're grouping subjects into kind of two different activation patterns. We're still talking about college students,
Right.
like, or you know, we're talking basically about 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we know like white matter maturation has probably, you know, ceased with all the subjects that we're actually scanning, and you know, but if you know, I'm always harping on this data set, but you know, Child Mind Institute, Healthy Brain Network data set, you know, it's got kids from 5 to 21, which would be a much better sense of you know, it would be definitely a good way of getting at like how, you know, potentially how strategies are changing in terms of some of the cognitive tasks. You know, I'd always kind of focused on the more perceptual ones there, but anyway, I mean, I certainly would love to. You know, my issue with a lot of with cognitive science is, or you know, I'm biased because I'm coming from cognitive development as an undergrad, so that's kind of the lens I see stuff through. But I you know, I think Phelan and Smith's point was a good one in terms of, you know, how can you ignore how these brains, you know, developed, and you know,
Yeah.
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 As well as Levin's point that like none of this is hard coded, you know, like this is so you know, he's shown so well in so many settings that like this isn't you know, genetics. this is a lot of interaction, you know, complex interaction.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's not like deterministic genetics, anyways. But yeah,
Right. Yeah.
it's like the interaction, signaling interactions, behavioral
Signaling interactions,
origins,
and then you know, you get an initial kind of, you know, connection, you know, connection network with weights that has a phase. Then that's growing and changing. It's changing because of its interactions. You know, it's changing. Yeah, even perceptually, it's changing. But certainly how it's interacting with the environment.
Yeah.
And anyway, but I'd still love to flesh that out more.
Yeah, that would be.
Or you know, like how much of that, Could you say, Jesse, more about the neurodiversity, like, or what previous readings do you feel have brought in the neurodiversity?
That was basically what I was trying to say earlier. We haven't done anything here, like not in this
Yeah.
reading group anyway. I don't really think in the lab in general. Like to be maybe a bit more um, fair than that. Avery, who isn't really active in the lab, has spent a lot of time in that space. We've talked about it, but it hasn't been. We have not in the lab or formally in any of our, as in I say, everybody present here. Our reading groups haven't touched on it, so I feel like that's what I was trying to say earlier. Is like this is a whole space that we haven't looked at, and there's a lot there. Like even even I was walking through a bookstore today, and just like so many like the books, the psychology section is dominated by all these books on this thing, and it's like those are the pop side, books about how to live with that. And I made a remark about how it's like kind of like the psychology section has become this sort of like conceptual conceptual alchemist's shop, or it's like you get all these different ideas about how to fix or mitigate your living with reality in this way. And like, I'm not out on it. It's just it's 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 kind of this. It feels like I feel like it puts a lot of the challenges of, like this whole thing like right in my face sometimes, because it's like okay, like there's really important things that require you know just advice on how to deal with, but like to push some of the broader, to actually try to push in the right direction some of these, or put in any direction, hopefully the right one, some like these bigger concepts and paradigms and stuff like that. Like there's just some sort. So to go back to your question, there is this space outside of, I guess, the DSM stuff that I'm working on, which hasn't been featured in the lab much. There isn't, and I would really like to do due diligence and handle that very specifically. And I don't know how that's going to go, because there's a lot there that I don't know.
So
Okay, but you do have a Renti role of dev in psychology, Cogsci 2021.
Mhm. That's something that we talked about at the Cogsci discussion group a few years ago, and it's a
it's a good review paper.
yeah, it's not anything groundbreaking. But basically, she advocated that hey, it's hard to get data from young things we can't see how they develop, so robotics would be maybe a good place to do that. And she kind of was looking at sort of the methodological challenges of that, and offering a solution.
Is this Loren? Oh, no, I've got the wrong. Sorry, Google gave me a funny hit on this. Why is it not giving me
It's
a Renti?
AIRENTI.
Yeah, it was giving me a Parenti.
Oh,
Yeah,
But,
I totally butchered the name really bad. Very
but
really.
no, or okay.
yeah, there we go.
I think it's this one.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, I remember that.
Well,
So Jesse did a really nice presentation on this in the session that we had.
I see.
And,
I see. It's AI.
yeah.
Okay.
So
I think
kind
that
of,
was-
yeah. He
Yeah,
kind
Oh
of,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I got the 2019. Is there a 2021?
No, the 2021 was
the
the
session.
Cogsci event.
Right.
We had a discussion group at Cogsci 2021, the conference.
Got you. Okay.
So I wonder, I don't know much about the neurodiversity literature, but I wonder if people were talking, I mean, in the academic space about like the links between neurodiversity and development. So, I mean, it's kind of an emerging topic, and we have like a lot of, but is there any stuff like on kind of linking explicitly to development and things like that? I don't know.
Sorry, say that again.
So is there a lot of stuff linking like, or is there any stuff linking neurodiversity as a topic to development? I mean, I know there's stuff on like if you think about autism, you know, people talk about development and autism, but I mean, in which might be where that literature is. They might not call it neurodiversity, but like, you know, it's
Yeah,
it's
for sure.
right.
For sure. No. I mean, well, certainly, you know, again, I'm going to be somewhat biased towards the neuroimaging, right? But certainly, you talk about it. You know, it's fundamental. It's the assumption in psychiatry that we're looking at a kind of a big bundle of different developmental trajectories, right?
Yeah.
And you know, and all are giving us, you know, like we might talk about cognitive differences, but we're still talking about you know, fully formed, basically fully formed adults.
Right.
At the end of the day, and so yeah, like neurodiversity is definitely baked in neuroimaging. Whether yeah, I just you know, again, like I'm just trying to think about how to. I mean, I think the Thalen Smith is just interesting in terms of like trying to give you a way to take apart some of those you know.
I know you're mentioning a few different things in saying this, but like, is there if I was to search for something for Braylon Smith, what would I look for?
Oh, Thalen, Thelen, Smith, and it's like dynamical systems approach to robots and
Yeah.
something.
Uh,
You know, it's funny. I can remember what the cover, like the book cover, looks
yeah, I know.
like. You know,
The blue book, that blue book, that's what it is.
uh, uh,
It's a
that's not the
1994 book, so
yeah.
it's
Yeah,
going to
it's
be
1994. Yeah, put in robots.
Like this one?
mm,
I don't think that's blue.
that's it. Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's. I'll try and dig up what I'm thinking too, or if I'm thinking of something different. Um,
Right. Good to know if I ever come across it.
Yeah, it's a pretty good book.
it's great. What am I thinking of though, Bradley? Am I thinking of something that's maybe more Breitenberg-ish?
Uh, not sure. Um, yeah, I don't know. But yeah,
I want to ask my old
Hmm.
okay. I'm. This is. Can you put it down as something Morgan's gonna find
Yeah,
yeah.
I'll bother you in
this
Slack about it or something.
this robots related book.
Oh, you want me to search for robot? I forgot about that.
No. Yeah, but I'm thinking that that's not from Esther. I mean, from Thalen and Smith now. But you know what? You know where I might be able to find this is under the neurorobotics. The neurorobotics platform at the old Human Brain Project had a great reading list. And I don't know, they've moved to this new eBrains platform, and I will be very upset if they've removed the but I want to get certainly I've got this article of Linda Smith's like 20 also 2019 development weaves brains, bodies, and environments into cognition. That sorry.
Yeah.
Hmm. Adam Shea and Linda Smith.
Yeah, but that's the same Phelan Smith. Yeah, and of course is from Indiana because like all the great people are in Indiana.
Yeah.
Like it's just amazing how he. Anyway, but you know, I mean, again, I would love to show. Sorry, the kids just came back and now the dog's freaking just a second.
Yeah. So yeah, this is maybe another paper to put on the list. I don't know if we're keeping a list, but
I think what I'm going to do. I think this is a really important meeting. I appreciate everything that's happening. I think this framework is really going to help sort out some things and getting
oh yeah,
getting these things into those categories and then processing through them that way will be very good.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, and then this is just kind of a set of guideposts, right? Like this is what
Sure.
people are thinking about. We can then, we have kind of our own approach, which we should, to distinguish between, all the things that are kind of emerging, and then, how do you go forward from there? How do you use development as a tool? What is it that you might be interested in? We haven't talked anything about embodiment, really. So yeah, there's.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's another thing to put in the development part, I guess. But that's. Well, we'll work on this some more, and I think it'll get.
Yeah. That the way she brings in embodiments, I think is a great. Well, again, it's just super important.
Yeah.
And I think she definitely tries to make the case that you see that kind of action performance matching cognitive stages, which again is kind of I mean, like kind of Karmeloff Smith and neo Piaget kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Is there an actual Google like neo Piaget thinkers? I don't know, but I think this is like a quote from.
Yeah, well, that was. I certainly that's how I felt about Karmeloff Smith and Clark back in the 90s was like trying to do Piaget but updated.
Yeah.
And I forget what their Karmeloff and Smith and Clark book was.
It would be more probably like Neo Weiner.
Neo Norbert. Yeah.
But I like Neo Norbert because it sounds like authoritatively dorky in the best way. I'm Neo Norbert.
Yeah. So beyond modularity, a developmental perspective on cognitive science was 1995. Was Karmeloff Smith? I mean, as you can see, who she's certainly responding to
The modularity craze.
back
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah.
You know, which I can't believe is like 30 years ago now. And you see that drawing there. So that drawing was very much the basis of my thesis, was trying to do a replication of some cognitive development drawing work that she did. But she had so like taking a stand midway between Piaget's constructivism and Fodor's nativism. Again, I'm not gonna defend that necessarily, but she did have, maybe it was just a paper with Clark.
Maybe.
But she definitely wrote something with Andy Clark.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the 90s that would you know, I think potentially be relevant and and you certainly would get a better sense of his perspective, or how his perspective has changed over time. You know.
His and Clark's, or
Yeah, Andy Clark. Yeah.
okay. This has been an action-packed meeting, and it's past the top of the hour, so we can let it be for here. I think for next time, I'll try to pick out some things for anybody. I think Amanda was going to say something too about focusing on this. We can review this again. I think I'd like to kind of come back to this next week and kind of see where we are, and maybe even structure some other of the potential next level papers or current papers.
Good.
What?
I just found it.
Okay.
And sorry, I was just going to give you the title, and now the University of Edinburgh is asking me about cookies. Like, I don't care. Why?
I saw I found old school Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, and one of the first episodes I saw of it, the thief started out in Edinburgh, and I have a friend who's doing a master's in Edinburgh, and
Yeah.
I had to say, oh, did you see Carmen Sandiego's henchman on campus? Because in 1993 she was there coordinating.
So it's the cognizer's innards.
That's awesome.
A psychological and philosophical perspective on the development of thought, Mind and Language, 1993. Yeah.
Wow.
Great
Okay.
read.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
This is Karamov Smith, yeah.
Yeah.
With Andy, yeah.
And so
And I think they had some other stuff too, because I mean, again, like we're going back a long way. But this was very much like my undergrad thesis work in experimental psych.
yeah. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and you know, like her Carmela Smith stuff and Linda Smith's.
Okay. Well,
and this robots book that I'll find.
Okay.
well, let's think about how these fit into stuff, and maybe we can go through parse them out for next time. But
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I'll try to sort out identify an actual reading for next week in the next few days. But this is all really good stuff. So, thank you everybody, Amanda and everybody else who's kind of been a part of the ride. But I'll say good night for now, and see you, I guess, tomorrow. We're doing the other reading group tomorrow, I think.
Yeah.
And it's 4. So I mean, like, sorry, 4 Pacific.
Yes.
7.
Yes.
Yes.
7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific. Amanda's their cybernetic reading group.
I'll see if somebody else can pick up my daughter. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
That's totally
everybody.
doable.
Bye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.
Yeah.